Okay, I think we'll make a start. So welcome to everyone here live and also those tuning in online. This is the last Bristol Vision Institute seminar of the term, but it's a special seminar because it's held jointly with MyWorld. Now, those two organisations overlap, but not perfectly, so there might be people here who don't know about the other half, and I know for a fact that there are certain people in the audience who maybe don't know anything about either BVI or MyWorld. So it's worth saying a little about that before introducing our speaker. So the Bristol Vision Institute brings together research in the university that is interested in vision and the visual world, and that spans psychology, computer science, ophthalmology, biology, and the creative arts. I'm a biologist in Chatham. My own research is on animal coloration, so you'll probably guess that this talk is of special interest to me. MyWorld sprung out of that link between technology and the creative arts. It's the result of a £30 million government grant to form a hub of excellence here in Bristol because of not just the research in the university on the technology side and creative media, but also the fantastic industry that's based in this city. So who better to give this seminar than Michael Pitts, who spans technology, creative media, and fascinating natural history. He's an Emmy Award winning cinematographer, filmmaker, and I won't list all the programs that he's worked on. He'll show many clips during his talk, but basically, if you've seen an amazing underwater sequence in any TV program in the last 30 years, Michael probably filmed it or was involved in it in some way. Some bits of safety advice: if an alarm goes off, it's not a practice, so follow me as I run for the door and the exit. There'll be a Q&A session at the end, and I'll say a bit more about how that will operate at the time. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Michael.
Thank you, Ennis. That's very kind of you to give me that wonderful introduction. But well, thank you so much for coming here this afternoon. This morning we've had some practical classes about an introduction into wildlife filmmaking with particular emphasis to underwater work. And that is my speciality. It's my speciality. That's what I focus on. But actually, going back through my career, it's about filmmaking and having a passion to make films. And you can apply that equally on the surface as you can underwater, but I do specialise in underwater, but I love making films, be it for general documentaries, archaeological programmes, or natural history programmes. But there's many aspects of filmmaking, but I think the wildlife filmmaking is probably one of the most rewarding. It's also one of the most challenging because frequently you're on your own, you're using your own resources, you have to have field skills to work out in the field. The diving I'll put to one side at the moment because normally you're with a dive team. The regulations now are so much more stricter than when I first started. But what I enjoy about my work and how I got into it, because that's one of the questions people always ask, is how do you become a wildlife cameraman? And there's no easy sort of route. You can't go down to your local job centre and say, right, have you got any vacancies, please? This is what I want to do. It's something that you have to have that passion inside you, and that's what will drive you. But there are many aspects, as I say, I was saying this earlier, that being part of a film crew, it's not just the cameraman, it's all the support that goes behind the cameraman. And it's also the post-production side of it, because in the field you have 9/10 preparation, 1/10 actually pressing the button when you're actually turning over. But the people that are there to help you, like for example Katie here, who assists on the surface, I have a dry assistant and I have underwater assistants, but it's the way you have that team, and that carries on in the post-production side, like data management, research. The research is so important, and working with scientists like Innes himself, biologists, and local boat skippers, people that will give you information about the subject you're filming. Never be frightened to ask questions, because they can have an insight to something that you may not know about. So never be afraid to ask questions like that. So I always say the easy part is actually pressing the button. It's actually getting to the point of pressing that button, because you could be on a reef in the Galapagos Islands, and I've thought this at times where I've been actually in a position where on a rebreather, all the kit that's come out, getting to a location for a particular tide, having that moment and being there at the right time, kit hasn't gone down, and you're just thinking the logistics that go into these shoots is incredible. But as an independent filmmaker, if you're working on low budget, or as my wife calls it, loss leader projects, so I do a lot of those, where you walk away from it and you sort of think to yourself, well, what was that all about? Because I've done a year's work on this and I've sort of broken even or something, if you're lucky. But sometimes you have to do those things, because if you have, I think, as people can, I get asked to give quotations on particular tenders and what have you, and I think sometimes people think, oh, you do it as a hobby, and it's something you don't, I enjoy doing it, it's my life, and so you should be able to do it for nothing, basically. But of course life doesn't work like that. But how do you become an underwater cameraman, or how do you become a wildlife cameraman? My passion started as soon as I got, just make sure I was very lucky. We lived in Germany, my father was in the Air Force, and I was on holiday in the Baltic, and I knew this German family were camping next door, and he lent me his mask and snorkel, and that was it. Because once I put my head underwater, I thought, that's where I want to go in my life. I didn't know it then, but I look back on it, and it was a huge sort of, it's opened up another world for me. And we've just been talking about Jacques Cousteau and the Silent World, and reading those books, and I just thought, I want to join the Navy, I want to be a frogman, this is what I want to do. It didn't quite work out like that, but the seed was sown. And it worked out to, through a career in commercial diving. I was trained as an aircraft engineer in the military, and then I came out, and I was looking around. I didn't want to I was working on helicopters, and I didn't want to continue that. So, but what I wanted to do was go back into diving. So I did a commercial diving course at the diving school in Fort Bothersand, which is now sadly closed. But from that course, I then went into the North Sea. I was working as an inspection diver, North Sea, Arabian Gulf, subsea construction. And then I ended up in West Africa, and it was in West Africa that I got the real bug for making films. And it was I had a small Super 8 film camera, I had an underwater housing, and in my spare time I started making, it's being observational, being able to look at, say, fish and seeing groupers, how they hunt, and just small things that I was observing. And I was really enjoying my work, but at the same time looking at things, thinking, I must film that, I must do this. You can talk about these things, but I wanted to show people what I was doing. So I made this film over a year in my spare time, in the evenings mostly, off the ship. And I just jump in, I put a set on my back, go in the water on the rig, film a sequence. I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I was getting into it. I could rock, and watching your footage yourself, going back home and then having it processed, looking at it on an edit machine. I think, oh, I haven't got that shot, I haven't got this, but I made loads of mistakes. And then, anyway, edited the film. I made 30 VHS copies, and they sold out immediately. I made another 30, sold those, and then I got called by a company called, Thames Television, the head of Thames Television, because I'd entered the film into a festival, and from that festival, he rang me and he said, are you a professional cameraman? I said, no, it was an amateur film competition. I said, no, I'm not. I'm a professional diver, but not a professional cameraman. And they said, well, I'm pleased to report you've won this competition, and I've sent your film to a company called Survival Anglia. Anglia Television then wrote to me, about 2 weeks later, and I was invited up to London, and then I was offered my first assignment. And that's basically how I broke into it. And I know things are so very different now. I think it's harder. It was more expensive then to invest in the equipment, so much more expensive. It's cheaper now, relatively, but there's so many more people that want to do it. But it's not something that you have to focus on. There's so many other avenues in filmmaking. As I said, it's research, sound, music, data management, and research, which I equally enjoy. But going from diving, you know, I've dived all sorts of equipment, but I always say the Mark I mask and snorkel is probably your main piece of gear, and I'm a great believer in free diving and working because you're silent, you're using your own stamina, you're not frightening wildlife, and in certain conditions like this is in the Arabian Gulf, filming green turtles, you can get so much closer and you're so much more maneuverable than having diving kit on. I'll wake up here. This is the moment I start. It stopped. I was talking too long. We did a test run earlier. Thank you, Emmy. So we go into a situation, my last assignment was working for the BBC and Apple on the new Prehistoric Planet. So going from those simple underwater housings made of plastic, I'm now sort of working with cameras. These are my cameras, by the way. These are belong to the Spree. But using, this is shooting backplates for creating the CGI of the actual action. So I'm shooting the plate, the canvas, if you want, for the CGI artist. Team of 400 people creating the movement that's going to be in there. So to do that, you have a top camera, witness camera, the main Monstro 8K camera. Everything's tripoded, everything's got to be distanced and measured. So it's a different type of diving, but still something I so much enjoy. And for example, we are creating scenes here where we have a type of gastropod lying in the channel, which is a model, and then I have the shells, which are all created for me, all these models, and then using the seagrass is my backdrop, and then in the blue there'll be a creature coming across the top. So that's just a backplate, but using the seagrass, which is live obviously, and using that scene and creating, this is they call it the gastropod graveyard. So this is what we were doing, this is where they were going, this is coming out in the year. Also, I'm having working out in remote locations. This is in Siberia. I was working in the Sokoty-Alin Reserve, tracking the Siberian tiger, and how frustrating it can be when you work. I was living in the forest for 6 weeks in different huts, but in 6 weeks, not only didn't I film the tiger, I never even saw it. So incredibly difficult. Looking back on it, the way we approached it in the wrong way. And it's understanding your subject. So reading up about the subject. There's a lot known about the Siberian tiger, how it hunts, but it basically hunts at night, preferably in the snow. So straight away you're up against something. But I saw lots of other things. I saw bear, tracking the sika deer and what have you, but I never actually saw the tiger. I did hear the tiger one night. It was minus 25 and we heard it roaring. It could have been a mile away, it could have been 4 miles away. But so fieldcraft is so important. Finding yourself in, this is for a program about Dubai for Discovery Channel. So working in the desert. So you work in extremes, and just being able to cope and adapt and finding subjects. So research is hugely important because you just don't go out there and shoot things. You can do general scenics and sunrises and sunsets, but it's got to be more than that. here we are in the Galapagos. This was on a series called Trials of Life, and I was on my first big BBC assignment. And for me, as somebody that was, I loved my diving. I'd heard so much about the Galapagos, and here I was working on a David Attenborough series, and I'd never met him, but and I never did on this series, but I had to go up to one of the volcanoes, Alcedo, on Isabella Island, and film a particular sequence, because Trials of Life looked at different aspects of animal behaviour, and this was how these giant tortoises, these ticks go inside the shell. So these ticks go into the skin of the tortoise, around the neck and around the rear end. That's why that guy's looking up the backside. So he's got a stick, and he's just, the bird, there's a particular finch that will do a dance in front of the tortoise, and that dance will trigger the tortoise to stand up on its forelegs high, stretch itself. The bird hops in, starts pulling out the ticks. Well, I was up there for 5 days, and as you can imagine, you're under a lot of pressure from yourself. That's where the pressure comes from. So I was the cameraman, my assistant Roger, and I had a researcher there with me, and we kept seeing the behaviour. The behaviour might last for a minute, but by the time you put down a tripod, get the camera on top, focus it up, about to press the button, the bird flies away. And it was only on the last morning, and this is what Chris was doing actually, had a small twig, and you could just simulate the bird pecking, and then the tortoise would stand up, but I still didn't get the bird in shot. So on the last morning, we were clearing the campsite, and we had this old bread, and I was just throwing it away, some old crusty bread. We didn't take much up there, and these finches came in and started pecking around, and there was a tortoise, and I suddenly saw the tortoise stand up, and I realised it was the bread. And so I found a tortoise, I was feeding the finches, and then got it in front of the tortoise, and the birds flew in, and bang, I got the sequence on the last morning. So that was such a relief. So there we are. Now, behaviour, going back to animal behaviour again. Dragons of Komodo. I got this film I was approached by TVNZ, Television New Zealand, to go to the island of Komodo. I'd just come from Komodo. I'd just been on this shoot. It was all about a German environmentalist called Eugene Schumacher. And part of that was to go to Komodo for 5 days. The producer, we'd had days filming. The producer said, Michael, we finished, you've got enough, we can go back. And I said, well, I've only just started. And he said, no, we only need a few shots. And I was gutted. I could not believe we were going back. But anyway, we did. We got back. I arrived back in Hong Kong, where I was living then. And I walked into the flat, straight from the airport. Phone rings. It was TVNZ. A guy called Rod Morris, the producer. He said, Michael, your name's been given to me by the BBC as a cameraman that can film both above and below the water, and we'd like you to go to Komodo. Are you available? I said, I can't believe you're asking me, but I said, yes, definitely. So anyway, we get out there, we start filming, and what happened was the big thing about, this is my hide, I lived in this hide for nearly 6 weeks, but this is the pouring nest female. The female's half the size of a male. She's about 6 foot long, and this female had laid her eggs. I didn't know where, but I knew she'd laid her eggs in this megapode mound. Now, a megapode is a bird, like a chicken, and it's like a scaup fowl, doesn't fly, just scratches like this. And over successive generations, they build up these huge mounds from here to here, this high, and they will lay their eggs, single egg, they will lay an egg in the mound. 40 days later, it hatches, the chick climbs out, gets its way to the surface, can't believe it does it, and chick comes up, then walks off into the jungle, into the forest. So we knew from her behaviour that this female was going to lay her eggs. She already mated. The incubation time of these eggs, it's incredible, is 8 months. That's a long time for an egg. It's never that length of time. So we knew she'd laid her eggs, and here we are. Here's the mound. You get an idea of it now. So we knew she'd laid her eggs. There were 6 tunnels. So she'll dig decoy tunnels, And those tunnels can be anything up to 3 or 4 meters long, going straight down. So then she backfills them. And the reason she does it is because the main predator are male Komodo dragons. They will smell the mound, they know she's done something in there, and they'll dig into the mound to find the eggs. And so the female will stay on this mound for 2 months when she's laid her eggs, and she will defend it tooth and nail. And I've seen her take on males twice the size and still beat them, because I filmed it from that hide. Now, because they don't, they basically diurnal, they don't operate at night. They're a reptile. They go into a hole at night. They come out in the morning. So my day would start with a 3-mile walk to the mound, where I had my hides. I had 2 hides. I had one tower, one on ground level, one above it, so I could look into the mound. But with filmmaking, if you're on the level of never look on top of your subject. Occasionally you can do that shot, but I like to be on their level. You're in their world, not your world. So you're not standing up looking down on it. You're actually down there, right on ground level. That's where she is. And so I wanted to get her. So I built a decoy tunnel. And what I noticed was, it's like anything, your observation. So I take my breakfast, I get up early, I'll be up at 6, put my backpack on with the guys, they'd help me with the camera kit, we walk to the hide, I'd get in, have my tea flask and what have you, and then I had boiled eggs. And I used to crack my boiled egg in the morning, and then one morning she just looked up like this, and because you know what a boiled egg smells like, and she was starving, this female. And you could see her, she was so gaunt, so I threw the egg out, and she immediately ate it. And then over a period of time, she became totally habituated to me, and I was quite happy walking around her. She just totally ignored me. But getting these sorts of shots, you think to yourself, right, I want to get her going in the tunnel. So I just dig another tunnel doing the top. I put some tarpaulin in to protect the camera, put the camera in, got a boiled egg, dropped it in there, and then she'd come down the tunnel towards me. So that's how I got the shot there. So this is what you would expect. It's her world, not your world. So now, this has never ever been done. It's been done once, it's never been done again. It's been done in San Diego Zoo. So, about 6 months after the egg-laying sequence, I had 4 trips altogether. So we'd gone back, I flew back from Hong Kong, got there with a big incubator. So the idea was dig into the mound, find those eggs, find the egg chamber, put the eggs into the chamber at the right temperature, and then wait for that hatching, because that was the idea. So we miscalculated all our digging, because we spent 4 days before we got in there, and we took turns, and I remember being in there, head down, and worried about the whole thing collapsing. But I thought we have to find these eggs, and when she backfills, it's loose sand, so it's easy to dig out. So we got all the, we're digging 6th tunnel. It was 6 tunnels we found, and on the day, and I was behind Rod, and he was digging, and I suddenly felt something go behind my leg. I was just wearing shorts, and I just felt something go behind me, and I grabbed it like that, and I had a baby dragon in my hand. I could not believe, my head just stood up. I could not believe it. And here we are. We had, there we go, this is actual. Now, I couldn't take the camera down the tunnel, it was just too small space. So I had to quickly build an egg chamber, and I got some corrugated iron off the top of the hide. I stuck it over the top of my head, and then I filmed these eggs, and I had eggs hatching out in my hand and trying to keep them back in the shell. But that's how we got it, and it's never been done. I don't think you get the permission now, because they're so vulnerable. These dragons are so, yes, they are meat eaters, but what I didn't want in this film was just to make another, sort of chainsaw massacre type film. It had to be more about how that female fought against the odds she laid 24 eggs. Out of the 24 eggs, there was 18 successful hatchings, and there was a couple of stillborns, and just 4 eggs never even hatched. So now we're talking about focal length on lenses, and how on the surface when you're filming, how you can change your lens. If the big thing about film school is they give you one prime lens, a 50mm lens. It said, right, you're using one lens, and from that one lens you're going to make a film. You can't change the lens. So what do? You can either take the camera closer to the subject, or take the camera further away from the subject. and that's how you're going to do it, because you have to change your shot size to be able to edit it. So underwater is exactly the same. The only problem about underwater is you can't change your lens unless you've got a zoom on. You can change the zoom. Zooms are great, I love them, but if you're going to do something really serious like Prehistoric Planet, it's all primes. Everything's on distagons, very fast, sharp lenses. That's what they want. But here underwater, this is an oceanic white tip. I'd never seen a white tip, and I wanted to go and see one. And that's a sort of I love sharks. It's a passion of mine. And it was just, I went on a dive trip with the local dive club in Bath, and they were going out to Daedalus Reef in the Red Sea. And I thought, right, I've got a very good chance of seeing it. And took the camera kit, went with a friend of mine. And on the first night, I was coming back to the boat. It was quite dark. The light was just going down, and one swam straight in front of me. Now that trip was, I think, £1,100 for a week, including your flights, the board, the diving, and everything. And to me, that was worth it. If I had to go back the next morning, I'd have still been happy. But then we get the action. But of course, you get them in the right light, and how you can use the lenses to your advantage in terms of, it's all very well. It's wide angle shots are wonderful, and it's easy, not easy to shoot, but shooting good wide angles in clear water is relatively simple. It's when you but you can get quite not bored with the shots, but they become quite the same. And for cutting purposes, you want tighter images, and editors will always say, you want a combination of shots, mid shots, wide angles, tight shots, close-ups, extreme close-ups, and if you're lucky, macro. So working on a shark sequence, it's when you put on a tight lens, like 100mm macro, and you're using that underwater, your opportunities are to actually, with a wide angle lens on, you can sit there all day, just go bang, 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 bang as the sharks go by. It's quite easy. When it's with a macro lens, you have to wait for that moment, and you haven't got autofocus. So I pre-focus my lens. I don't even touch the zoom, or if it's a prime lens, you can't anyway, but don't touch the zoom. But I wanted to get the detail of the eye, and then, so I'm over cranking, say 60 frames a second, and then you wait for that moment, and you think, right, you can just gauge the distance, and it's just using your eye. I've got to say, I'm focusing at 6 feet or 5 feet, whatever. When the shark goes by, I know I'm going to get the shot. So that's how you do those sorts of things. And editors will thank you for it. These are the ampoule of Lorenzenzi. These are the indicators for vibration that the shark detects from miles away. These sensors, it's quite incredible. And also in the mouth as well. Again, using, these are little cigar fish in the foreground. This is a school of scalloped hammerheads in Darwin's Passage. And, the thing about Charles Darwin, of course, they would be fishing, collecting specimens, but they would never have seen such, so unfortunately he could never see anything like this. But of course, all his work was based on finches, but going underwater there is spectacular. But going back to the shot sizes and lighting, using drama with lighting, you can create feeling of tension. And here, I'm on the bow of a shipwreck in the Bahamas, and this is close to a shark feeding site. And I thought I'd like to, instead of filming in the middle of the day when most people go filming, it's lovely and bright, you get white sand images, I wanted to get something a bit more tense. And using half light, I love shooting in the period what's known as crepuscular, where you have half light. I love that period. You don't get very long, but the shots could be so much more dramatic. And just using a hint of infill. Again, looking down on the same sharks, how you can change the skin tone, how that's what they look like. I mean, it's just, I just love the sort of contrast of the different lighting. And then, of course, what happens with, I don't go around with a clipboard or a billboard shouting about the environment, but I've seen so many horrible things and dreadful things in the ocean during my time I've been in it, when I've been diving, and seeing, for example, small sharks. They're too small for finning. This is on a long liner. They just cut the line sharks died. They haven't even bothered to fin it, but that's off the back end of a longliner, and these sorts of images, a lot of people swim past it, but to me, it was such a waste of life and what goes on. Using again freediving is a great way of getting into those locations. If you've got a lot of equipment on, I mean, generally when I'm on the back of a dive boat, I could be on Midway in the middle of the Pacific, or on the Galapagos, depending where I am, or the West New Britain in the Solomon Islands. What I tend to do is, if we're on a rebreather shoot, I'll have my rebreather, I'll have my open circuit, and right at the back of the boat, I'll have my freediving fins, mask and snorkel. So I've got 3 choices. I've got, this is where I'm geared up. With a rebreather, you cannot make a mistake. You have to go through all your drills. You have to go through a pre-breathe, sit on the back of the deck for 5 minutes, just using the unit and breathing with your mask on, so you know the unit's working, and you're watching your handsets and knowing that is a lifesaver. It's going to take you underwater and bring you back up again. You can put a rebreather on your back, not turn on the handset or turn on the gas. You can happily breathe. You're breathing away. You'll last about 3 or 4 minutes, and then you go unconscious on the surface, if you're lucky. People have put rebreathers on, not turned them on, jumped in the water, carried on breathing, and they've drowned. It happens all the time. So that's why it's so important to go through your drills. A rebreather will kill you. It can, but it's a brilliant piece of kit. So open circuit, but it takes time. So if you see a humpback whale go past, you can't put a rebreather on. You don't want to. It's also slow. You're not going to go very fast. I wouldn't even put my open circuit on, which is very simple. Put a regulator in your mouth, you turn the gas on, you know you're going to breathe. Mask and snorkel, on the other hand, you put your fins on, put your mask on, straight out, and you're going to get something. Same with these spinner dolphins. This is in Midway, on Midway Atoll, middle of the Pacific, and I saw a huge school go by, and I jumped in, and they just went far away in the distance. But these tail end Charlies suddenly saw me. I just held my breath, and I saw them come towards me, and bang, I got the one shot. Again, free diving, whale sharks in the Arabian Gulf. This is using a fisheye lens, a 16mm lens. This is an 18 metre, it's nearly 60 foot whale, totally harmless, filter feeder, and also just using same shot, but converting it to black and white, how it can make the whole thing change. And if you're doing stills photography, it's a great way of altering a shot. Again, going back to the environment, seeing things like, this is in the Arabian Gulf. Now, a terrible thing, I was about to make a dive, and I saw this white shape floating towards me, and I was filming a reef. I'd all set up, and I had my stills camera in the boat. For some reason, I had a fisheye lens on it, and it was I had the dome on, so I couldn't take it out of the housing. And it's using, now if I'd taken that photograph, if you look at the photograph, if I'd taken that photograph without the boat in the background, it wouldn't be so powerful. It would just be, it's a terrible sight. It's a turtle, some fisherman or somebody on a boat has thrown a whole load of polypropylene rope over the side. It's got caught on the reef. The turtle is inquisitive. It's got tangled up with the rope. It's basically drowned itself. It just got caught up, and it probably, I don't know what happened, but anyway, it was dead, and I got the shot like that. So that's just marine debris. So we're going to look at plastic as well a little bit later. Going into the intimate world of seagrass, looking at habitats and understanding what you might find is again another way of, you can read up about, I'm not a biologist, but I love reading about, I love wetlands. I like seeing, I'm not a twitch or a birder, but I love looking at birds and going up to Slimbridge and what have you. But in the seagrass world, you find all sorts. And this is a spiny seahorse. Sorry, shorthorn seahorse. This is in West New Britain. But then I contrast that with the trade in seahorses for traditional Chinese medicine. So here we are, we're in the Philippines now, and these guys have got homemade diving kit on. They've got hookers. You can see the hose pipe in their mouth. There's no regulators. They don't know anything about decompression sickness. A lot of them get bent. They're terribly in constant pain, these divers. They have no idea. They go up too quickly. They're great guys. And this is, they're basically, they're subsistence fishermen. They'll get maybe 50 cents for that seahorse there. They might get $1 for a pregnant male. You might get $1 US. By the time it gets to Hong Kong, that seahorse is worth $20. So they're getting 50 cents. For 50 cents, they get a sack of rice or a bag of rice. They might have 6 children, and that's how the trade is being driven. So it's that seahorse just sitting there. They get picked up, put in a bag, and then they get dried and sent off. Again, going back to this is in the Blackwater Lakes in Papua New Guinea, and this was filming a sequence for a series called Island Apart, 3-part series on Papua New Guinea. And having, we all worry about sharks, we worry about being bitten by or standing on a freshwater stingray or something where you get, sort of spine in your foot. If you remember the Australian presenter, not Steve Irwin, thank you, Steve Irwin, how he died. Basically, I knew the diving supervisor very well on that shoot, and he told me exactly what happened. And he said basically they corralled a stingray. Most stingrays would just swim away. I think all stingrays will swim away from you. You're swimming towards it, it just wants to go away. It doesn't want anything to do with you, it just goes the other way. And so you always give them a wide berth, or you go up to them, you give them an escape route. What happened was they wanted to get Steve free diving over the top of one as it swam towards camera, so the cameraman was here. Stingray's coming towards me. They got a diver on left side, right side. Steve then dived down, they corralled it. He'd only be in the water for 5 minutes. He came above the stingray to sort of grab hold of it on the wings, and the stingray just flicked its tail up. The spine went straight into his heart. He died by the time he got on the boat. He was dead. That's how it happened. So, but you worry about things like that. You don't think about things like that. But here in the Blackwater Lakes, I got Bill Hartzier. I came home. I didn't feel too brilliant. It's like having flu, and then about 6 weeks in, it's a microscopic snail that bores into your foot generally, because I was just treading it on the mud, and the snail will go into your, second only to a malaria, and I was just waking up in the middle of the night, was completely soaking wet, and I realised there was something seriously wrong. So I had a blood test, and and I found out what was wrong with me, and then I was treated. Now, going on to presenting. So just using, working on, I started gone from Trials of Life, Private Life of Plants, and it was on plants. I was contacted by the producer, Neil Lucas. He said, Michael, I've been doing a lot of filming for the series, but never with David. And I'd flown in from Hong Kong. David had been in Australia on a book tour, and he was coming from Australia. And the rest of the crew, Neil, the sound recordist, Trevor Gosling, and Pam, the production manager, they were coming from London. So I got into Jakarta, and this is we were filming in Sumatra. So I'd flown into Jakarta, and I was sitting there, and David had just got his knighthood. So I was thinking, right, what do I say when I first meet him? It's an honour to meet you, Sir David, or Sir Attenborough, or Sir. And I kept thinking about it. And anyway, I was in the airport waiting with the Indonesian fixer, Mr. Akai, who had all gold teeth and used to smoke these Kretek cigarettes. He was puffing away, and then he said, David, Sir Attenborough is coming. So I just saw him walking down the corridor of the airport. And I walked up to him and I said, it's an honour to meet you, Sir David. He said, no, he's Michael. He said, the honour is mine. And so straight away he takes the wind out of your sails, and he is like that. So we spent a week looking for this plant, Morphophallus titanum, the titanarum. And there it is in the wild. And finding it, these plants flower once every 1,000 days, once every 3 years. And they flower for about a day and a half. Then the flower collapses. So the chances of finding it are fairly minimal. So we had 22 trackers out in the forest looking for us. Here you have the male on the top, the female on the bottom, stigma. And we're going to go into my first sequence of my first big sequence with a presenter, and it happened to be David Attenborough. Are these press play here, don't I? Yeah, here we go. We're on. Thank you.
The most extraordinary of these insect enticers lives here in the tropical rainforest of Sumatra. It only flowers once in 1,000 days, and when the flower develops, it only lasts for 3 days. So very few people have seen it. But here it is. Technically, it's a whole group of flowers clustered around this, but you could be justified for regarding it as one flower. And if you do that, well then, this is the biggest flower in the world. It's related to the dead horse arum, but it's 9 feet tall and 3 feet across. It's Amorphophallus titanum, the Titan arum. The function of this great spike in the middle is to produce a smell, and if you smell it, it smells very strongly of bad fish. This apparently attracts insects, which come along here and go down into this great funnel to these small flowers that grow at the base. Until this film was taken, no one was sure what insect pollinated the Titan arum. As we watched, we saw that without doubt the job was done by tiny sweat bees. Like other arums, the male flowers form a band at the top. Below them, the female flowers with long yellow-tipped stigmas. The bees seemed to find some reward on the stigmas, for they crawled all over them, distributing the pollen they'd brought with them. But why should the Titan arum produce the biggest bloom in the world to attract such tiny pollinators? To be effective, these bees must bring pollen from another bloom. But since the plant is rare and only flowers once in 3 years, the nearest may be miles away. It's not easy to spread perfume over such distances in the still, humid air of the rainforest. Perhaps the best way to do so is to disperse it from the top of a towering spire, like smoke from a factory chimney.
It's interesting, like smoke from a factory chimney. David writes his own scripts, and it's something, that's such an important fact of filmmaking is writing, actually getting a narration that doesn't actually link with the picture, but says something else, and he's so brilliant at doing that. And I write scripts and my own scripts, and I get my wife to check it all through, and then it's less is more, really is less is more. Let the pictures do the talking, because that's what you're out there to do. But script is so important. Going back into different shot sizes and colours, using this is a leaf fish that will take up the colour of its host coral. And though it is a red coral, you can see that, but the fish itself is so brightly coloured. They're tiny, they're about sort of 30 millimetres, 35 millimetres, but they're beautiful. I love spending hours. I can work in the shallows, 6 to 7 metres, going along a reef edge, looking for a little colony of these. You might find 3 or 4 of them together. And using colour in a way I was shooting on a job in the Maldives, and I was shooting macro. I had a macro lens on. It's being ready for that now. I heard somebody shout, and this school of painted parrotfish were just going past me. Wrong lens on, and it was just like an instinctive bang, bang, bang. I fired 3 shots, the flash guns, the strobes only went off on one of them, but that was enough just to give the highlight, and a little bit of highlighting in Photoshop just to give the eye shine was enough to create that picture. So we're going into another sequence now. This is all shot in one day, basically. This was for a film called Desert Seas. Look at the shot sizes.
Along these city limits, gangsters prowl. Blue-finned trevally are predatory hunters cruising the hood. The wolves of the Red Sea reef, trevallies, are hunting through a nursery school of juvenile fusiliers.
Brilliant sound.
The trevally continue along the wall, searching for anything that strays too far for falling scraps. 2-metre wire corals reach further than most, and an enterprising little shrimp has made his home out on the Lynn. He survives by collecting passing morsels. His frontier post puts him into a shoal of sleek unicorn fish.
Yeah, that's shot in the day. Now, I saw the action and I was on a rebreather, so I could just put my back into the reef and wait for those trevallies to arrive. But it's also, so you can follow the action, it's going to happen, but you've got to do it, try and nail the sequence in one day. You don't think, oh, I'll go back tomorrow and carry on. It won't work like that. Tides change, the conditions change, and those fusiliers could have headed out, the juveniles will head out to sea. But what I wanted to do was use the trevallies as a link into my next sequence, which was the wire coral shrimp. So there's all that wire coral along the drop-off. This was filmed in Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. And so I know about wire coral, and you know, it extends out sort of 3, 4, 5 meters. It is wire coral, but it has, you might find 40 wire corals go along them, and one of them will have a little commensal shrimp. Now that shrimp will live on the wire, that particular wire, and it goes right out onto the end, and it could feed up in the water current. So, but to get the macro shot, how do I do that? I'm on a wall, I can't hold the camera that steady. You're talking about something, you know, sort of 10, 12 millimeters. So I need to get that shrimp off into an aquarium. So I'd already built the aquarium. I had an aquarium on the boat with the dive boat. So went back to the boat, got my reg off, we set everything up, topside camera, went back and I had a pair of wire cutters and I just got the shrimp right up to the end of the coral. I cut the end off about 3 inches, put it in a plastic bag, straight back to the boat, into the tank, towel over my head, had a blue background, shot the macro shots, got those shots done. You just put a pump in there so it makes it, you can disturb the background. If it's still water, it's a giveaway. If that water's moving, you need a little aquarium pump just to circulate the water, and you see little particles go through. You've sold it, you've done it. So put the shrimp back in with a piece of wire, back in the water, put your rig back on, go back to the site, put the shrimp back onto its coral, because I've already marked the coral, and I know which one it is, put the shrimp back on, he goes on, take the cut piece of coral, put it into a hole, jam it in, and that coral will grow into a new one. So that's how we did that little sequence. So, but that took a day, but it made the link between the trevally hunting and then going along the reef, and that's a visual link to the next sequence. It always worked really well. Now, years ago, I went to Barcelona. I went to a museum of Joan Miro's art in Barcelona with the family, and it was whilst I was in there, they made a film about Joan Miro, shot on 16mm, black and white, dubbed. It was in his last years, and it was fascinating watching the people in the audience. It was just a small little booth. There was kids in there, middle-aged, older people, watching them watch that artist at work. And a friend of mine, Nicholas Healy Hutchinson, who I work with a lot, I said to him one day, I said, Nicholas, you know, we should make a film about you. This is so important because it's not for now. It's not for 10 years. It's for 20 or 30 years' time. He said, do you mean when I'm dead? I said, yeah. I said, because it's a record of what you've done at a certain time. This is not a film about selling your paintings. This is a film about what makes you tick. So I made this film. This is one of his paintings. So watch the sequence. Shot in Dorset.
Sometimes you have a very, very soft light, like there's a painting of bluebell wood that I did recently. And this has no sharp sunlight at all, and it's a flat light, but because it's a flat light, you get more of an intense blue. Landscape is something that really interests me because it's constantly changing, and different times of the year have a different atmosphere and different weathers. What I'm always trying to do is get a feeling of what it's really like to be in a certain place at a certain time, and to get the atmosphere of that place and the essence of it. And sometimes in the winter you might have something rather dark and gloomy, but it's rather poetic in a funny sort of way. And some of my winter paintings, of course, I'm trying to get a sense of the coldness, and also I sometimes put a bird in, and it's a sense of the vulnerability of, say, a little bird in the landscape.
As the seasons change, the rich colours of summer unfold. Nicholas paints in a way that envelops you in the scene. It's as if you become part of this land.
In the summer, if I'm painting a landscape, I'd probably be trying to get a feeling of what it's like, the heat and the sun on top of a hill or whatever it is. That attracts me, of the particular place I'm trying to paint. But essentially, I'm trying to get the atmosphere, so I'll put various elements into the painting that I can see around me and things I can hear. So it might be, I'll see some wildflowers or something, and they may not be immediately in front of me, but I'll take them from one part of the composition and put them into the painting. But also birds and butterflies, and I'm trying to gather all the elements together to get a feeling of this particular place. And so that's really what I'm trying to do when I'm doing a painting.
And living in the Dorset countryside, which has remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of years, gives him a deep understanding of the hidden secrets of this place. The rugged beauty of the Jurassic coastline has featured in many of Nicholas's exhibitions. These paintings reflect far-reaching horizons, the ever-changing light, his passion for the sea, and the part of Britain he so cherishes.
Quite a lot of words there, so I'm counteracting myself. There we go. So that was that. So that led on to that film I made. It took me 4 years to make because I had to wait for the snow. So I pitched the film around the seasons. So that's how he follows the seasons in one county. And so people say, oh, where's the best place? I was asked that question this morning by somebody in the audience, and it's impossible to answer a question like that because I've travelled to over 100 countries filming. And I still think Britain is one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I really do. There's so much you can do in this country. I love it. But from that one film, I was then, at the beginning of COVID, I was asked by a gallery in Bath if I could make films for different artists. And this is a Bristol-based artist called Beth Carter, and this is one of her works. This was just to do a promo. Obviously, standing on a base, I took the base away, but to shoot, I wanted a dramatic title, so that was in the title. But this is just I think that's going to play. There we go. It's just, using on low budgets what you can do with bronze and how you interpret an art piece and how you can see my time of shooting. I'll let her do the talking in a minute, but this was all most of this was shot in my back garden and in a disused railway tunnel.
My name's Beth Carter. I've been making sculpture for about 25 years. I make figurative work, mainly in clay, have it cast into bronze generally. I live in Bristol and I work in Bristol currently. The reason I sculpt minotaurs has become apparent to me sort of slowly over the years. So I made my first life-size minotaur when I was about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that kind of thing, when I was on a placement in Cyprus from my college course. I had been making minotaurs for probably 10 years before I realised that they were actually, the reason I was so sort of obsessed with them was because they were sort of telling a story, a personal story about my dad. As most people know, the story of the Minotaur is kind of full of tragedy, and the Minotaur is supposed to be this sort of monstrous creature that's sort of very isolated and lonely in this labyrinth. And basically, he's born, he's a victim because he didn't ask to be sort of created, and he's sort of shunned and just put aside. And late, I realised this connection with my father's story, which he had a very brutal upbringing. He grew up in North London, very poor, to sort of quite a brutal existence as well. So in some ways, his father was a slaughterman, was an alcoholic, was violent. He had 5 brothers, and they were all sort of beaten regularly. And, it was horrible growing up. No education. He was expelled from school, and he was quite a complicated character. He suffered from depression in his later years, so hence our childhood was quite sort of colourful and difficult. But also he brought a lot of magic in.
Okay, I won't show that sequence because we haven't got time. I'm just going to go on to going back again to being on the level of the creature, the animal you're filming. Here we've got it's a crab on Ascension Island. It's spawning, so it will cross 2 volcanoes to get down to this particular beach. So it will make this annual migration, and it makes its way down there to spawn at night, and then it makes its way back. And these land crabs can live up to 60 to 70. I never realised, this is what you find out when you're working, but it is an incredible, this journey, you're thinking, God, what do they go through to get there? So I wanted to get right down. So I got myself in a wetsuit, just laid in the sand. It was mostly video work. So I shot all the video shots, these close-ups. Everything was shot at sort of 100 frames a second. Soap, I spray baby shampoo mix with water onto my dome or flat port, and then you've got to keep washing it off between each shot because you'll get that moment, bang, and I did a few stills at the end of it also, getting down on the level. If I shot that shot looking down at the crab like that, it'd be nothing. But being on its level, you get the feeling of what it's up against. Again here with the juvenile, so fully fledged, nearly fledged anyway, Blackfoot albatross. I was doing some snorkeling out in Midway, and I just popped up, and there's this albatross looking at me, and I just thought, right, here we go. So it was very inquisitive. It kept pecking at the camera, so it came over and I got the shot like that. So those water level shots can bring it alive, and you get the feeling, the sense of the water there, just what it's up against. Moving on to, I worked on a film called Plastic Oceans, which was actually premiered here in Bristol I think it was just before 2017 it was premiered, 2018, and I was working on, this is an island, Tarawa, it's formerly the Gilbert and Ellis Islands, and so I saw this scene, and this island is basically being overrun by plastic, because what happens is things get shipped in by container. Up until the 60s, of course, they didn't have anything like this. We were interviewing them, and they used banana leaves and nappies, and kids didn't have nappies, but of course now it's all disposable. So where does it all go? It goes into a not even a landfill, it just gets dumped at one end of the island. So what's happening is the whole island has been overrun by rubbish, much of it plastic, and they've got nothing to do with it. This was, to me, summed up the whole of what's going on. I saw the doll's head, it was facing the other way. I just turned it round and I got that shot like that. And now I was out in near Irian Jaya on a job about mandarin fish. It was all nocturnal filming, all shot at night. But I was at the night, I'd gone along one night, I was on the reef, I was looking for something, and I saw this plastic bottle being enveloped by coral. Now, let's hope in 200 years or 2,000 years' time, 20,000 years' time, we're all still here, or the planet's still here. But this plastic will be part of the geology of our planet, because it's going to be covered up by coral, as it is now. There's a Porites coral overrunning it. So that coral reef will get higher, and that plastic, if they put a drill hole right down into the bore, they'd come across a plastic level. They'll find a plastic in hundreds of years' time buried deep. So this just summed up to me what was happening. But this sequence follows, watch the lighting, and just watch how I shot it.
Yeah, the stomach is very, very full, and if we look here, there's some very dark pieces, some very light white pieces, and if you see, as I push on this, it's absolutely rigid, completely full of plastic all the way up.
Look at that.
Absolutely no doubt this bird died as a result of that plastic. That is literally a gut full of plastic. It's quite alarming, isn't it?
Oh, it's awful.
Range of plastic types and colours. We've got everything from the blues and the reds
His
to
stomach's just filled with it. Big pieces too.
big sharp
Heavy.
pieces.
Oh wow, look at the size of that big black piece.
That is an enormous piece of plastic.
Unbelievable.
To try and wrap your mind around the condition of this animal and the quality of its life really is quite an overwhelming thing. I do have some pretty rough days. I have to go home and really wrap my mind around where do we go from here.
Yeah, I cut that sequence quite badly to cut it down into size to show, and we're a bit behind on time, so I'm going to show one more sequence after this. But basically, the plastic ocean that was there, those sorts of images, you're never going to forget them. And seeing what I did see, but all the chicks, that was the fleshfoot shearwater on Lord Howe Island. Now those birds, you will never see them, they're nocturnal. You'll see them at night, they'll fly into you, the parents will fly in, but when the chick lives in a burrow, so the parent birds will come in from sea, and they've picked up pieces of plastic or squid eggs that have attached to plastic. They're thinking it's food. They then regurgitate that into the chick. So what happens is, if you can imagine having 6 kilos of plastic in your stomach, you're not going to be hungry. So the birds refuse to eat. So they fill up, they can't regurgitate it. They do when they get out of the nests, they can regurgitate it, but so many of these chicks are being nailed inside the tunnels. And when they do come out and you see them, I've seen them on the beach, you know that bird's going to die. It should never be seen in daylight. It flies out to sea. You can see them out at sea, miles offshore, but you won't see them on the beach early in the morning. They should be gone, long gone. And they've got that first bird, you may have not noticed, but had droop wing, so the wing's drooping. So straight away it's weakened. So that bird's, and to emphasise the point of the whole sequence, you're filming a dead bird on a beach, how do you make that more poignant? And I just pulled out some little feathers from its breast, and I just got one of the lads to blow it through frame. So that little moment, and also the lighting of them in the lab was nothing. It looks like it was a tin shack. But to step back from the scene, put a long lens on, just light that little picture of them looking through the window. I was looking through the window to get the establisher. So you can change, you don't have to shoot big wide angles. You can shoot it tight as well, it's more intimate. So we're just going to move on. I wanted to show one more highlight, looking at how I build models to get ideas before I even go into a sequence. This is when I was living on the marsh out on the Hong Kong-Chinese border. The local TV company heard about, I was trying to film a Dalmatian pelican, Pelecanus crispus. I'd gone to Tring. Tring is where the collection is of bird skins. And so Tring had some Dalmatian pelican skins, and I went there, measured everything up. It's not that lifelike, I have to say, but I made it. So I floated out into Deep Bay. I put that over my head, had a camera wrapped in cling film, so trying to keep it out of the water. And I swam out and just drifted out into the bay to go and get some shots. I did get some shots, but we never used them. They were still too far away. But it was great to do. Models, here we have Walking with Beasts. This was Walking with Dinosaurs, Walking with Beasts, Sea Monsters, and how using models to create CGI then was so expensive, so we did a lot of model work, and this is just 1 minute. If you need to go, please just go. Sorry about this.
By contrast, the water isn't usually dangerous for the Miratherium. They spend most of their day here. Although they are shaped like hippos and look a bit like pigs, Miratherium are related to neither. Look closely though, and the Miratherium's nose betrays its true family connection. The nostrils and lip have joined together to become one dexterous muscular unit, which helps them forage for food. This is in fact a type of trunk. These benign herbivores are early relatives of the elephant.
And that was early CGI. What was sad about that picture was looking at the seagrass. That was in Key West, that was like 20 odd years ago, but you can see how much pollution is in there already, because that grass was all covered in sedimentation. Going on to shipwrecks now, my particular favourite subject. This is on the wreck of the Invincible in the Solent Channel, using very bad visibility, but using the light to your advantage, and those moments where you can create a feeling of being on a. This is in the bilges of a third-rate French man of war, 74-gun man of war, and using again lighting. I buried key light. You can see the light, just rim lighting, using a light that you can't see, but you can put an edge onto the bottle. This is a rum bottle, fully intact with a cork in, and using the diver reflection off the faceplate. I knew the shot I wanted before I even got in. I knew I was going to do it. So this was for a magazine, and we made that sequence didn't play. I don't know if anybody here, I'd be quite interested, has anybody here seen Napoleon, made in Abel Gantz's 1924 masterpiece? Well, it's a film, it's 8 hours long. You've got to be a bit of an anorak to watch it, but he used the 3-screen, and I remembered this, and I wanted to create I didn't want to use CGI, I didn't want to use, headsets where you were actually looking at a VR headset. It didn't want to be for the new exhibition in the Historic Dockyard at Portsmouth, and now it's in Chatham, it's being shown in Chatham. But I wanted to create a 3-screen projection. So you could walk into a theatre like this, there'd be 3 screens, have one over there, and you would come in and think, and have lighting that you felt that you were underwater. That's what I wanted to create, because who's going to dive in the Solent Channel? 99% of people won't be diving in the Solent Channel, so I wanted to give that feeling of being underwater and having not necessarily. I had 3. The guys saw the cameras set up this morning. I had 3 GoPros, 3 wide-angle lenses on the GoPros, a tighter lens underneath, and I sent that drawing into National Museum's Royal Navy. They called me immediately and they said, we want to make the film with you. So that's how I got it. There's my camera rig. So I tested it like that and it worked. But put it on a tripod and it created this vista, like Panavision, but in the Solent Channel. There's the rig underwater. That's the sort of conditions you're working in. And I'm afraid we tried to play the sequence earlier, but for some reason it won't play. This is the sequence. Oh, this is the one that we can't show that, but this is my final sequence. This is why I go diving. It's sort of my favourite. I put this together. This is behind the scenes. We're on rebreathers there. Right, I think we'll stop there. Sorry, there's this last one, I forgot. There's this last one that's just been, it's 35 seconds. This is my next project, looking for this aircraft. And no, we've ended, that's the end of it. So there we are. Thank you so much for coming along. And I hope you enjoyed it. There we are.
Fantastic presentation. I'm sure there'll be questions both here in the room and if you online want to ask a question, then put it into the Q&A rather than the chat. We've got one already from Dylan Hill. What's your favourite individual shot that you've done? The one you're most proud of?
Oh, such a tough question. Well, I think probably one of my I was runner-up in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition with a photograph of 3 moray eels on an oil rig in West Africa, and that was a big breakthrough for me. And meeting, being awarded the prize in the Natural History Museum, I think that counts as a big one. But some of the that's one of my natural history favourite shots. And in terms of shipwrecks, probably a shot of the diver holding the bottle. I quite like that one. So there we are.
Questions from the audience?
I can always ask you for a couple.
All right, you go ahead. Hold on, so that people online can hear.
Thank you very much. It's about sound, so this is perhaps appropriate. Fabulous presentation.
Thank you so much.
In your sequence about trevally,
Yes.
You mentioned in passing that the brilliant sound, and that kind of sound is a kind of fictionless adult.
Broken glass sound, yeah. It wasn't my idea, that was the dubbing mixer.
But I was wondering, do you record underwater sound as part of your practice, or is it entirely a separate operation?
But that was entirely a separate operation. I have been on shoots where you've been recording whale sounds, but I wasn't actually doing that myself. But one of the things is working on coral reefs and mangroves, how you can hear so much going on because you have snapping shrimps, they're clicking away all the time. You hear this noise in the background, and it's a great sign of a healthy reef when you hear that noise. In deep water, you don't. With the sharks, you might get that huge rush of Galapagos reef sharks. They're being chased by a killer whale. Was being hunted by a killer whale. So no, you don't get any sound at all. You used to hear the rebreather, and you've got that. You can hear the oxygen going in. You hear that in the back of your head. And a lot of the time you're on comms as well, so you might be on a full face mask, and so you can talk to each other. But I tend to maintain radio silence underwater because if I can, because I think when you've got people talking underwater, it's just a disturbance. It's an extra disturbance. So keep it minimal. Yeah. Oh, go on, fire away.
A lot of this looks potentially dangerous, but you're still alive. So either you're very disciplined or very lucky. Which is it?
I think coming from a commercial background where people say to me, oh, as a commercial diver, it must have been so dangerous. It was, but the big thing about diving commercially on oil rigs is how everything is run as a professional operation. Back in the 80s, the late 70s, 80s, early 80s, there was a lot of, 1 year, 28 divers died in the North Sea. Just think about it, 28 divers. Wouldn't happen now. It's so regulated, it's so governed by legislation, and it should be. The training is second to none. But so that discipline, I think, is carried on with me. So I look at, it's assessing. You go on a shoot and you think, oh right, we're 5 miles offshore. I can give you one example. I was in the Seychelles just before lockdown in 2020, so it was about February, March. I was out there with Dr. Sylvia Earle, and it was all about hope spots around the world, which he promotes. And we were filming different locations around the Seychelles, and it was about day 3, and I was recceing some sites to take her, and we were offshore on a seamount. Now, a seamount is a submerged reef. It was about 20 metres deep, so it's a pinnacle that comes up, swept by currents, and you get a lot of marine life because it's out there. You're out 3-4 miles offshore, and Dutch lady was a dive guide. She went over with the director, a BBC director, and I thought, oh yeah, you can go in if you want. Generally these things don't happen, but she was very keen to go down and look at the site, and she hadn't dived for about a year, but she was a very capable diver. Both on scuba, I was on scuba, and I got to the back of the boat, I had the camera, and I didn't have an assistant with me, and I just looked over the side and thought, geez, that current's running fast. And I thought, and I looked at it, and I just looked at the boat, we were on an anchor, 4 miles offshore, and I just thought, I'd put an EPIRB on, which is a dive, you have an EPIRB, which is a Nautilus lifeline. So it's like, I call it the holy hand grenade. You can take it off, pull off the top, press the red button, hold it for 5 seconds, and it sends out an SOS basically. They can locate you with that. It also has a radio, so you can radio the boat. So I went back, and there was 2 in the box. I picked up one, clipped it on. Half an hour later, I was using it, and we got in. As soon as I got down, I was pulling myself down the line with the camera, pulling myself down. Got to the bottom. I was using up a lot of gas. I used up a lot of air. I got to the bottom. I started swimming away. Then I heard this big bang behind me, and the anchor had pulled out the reef. So the boat, I could see the anchor just scraping across the reef. I swam back, and the other 2 were further in front of me. They'd gone on ahead. I could just see them. So I went back, I jammed the anchor into a crack, managed to stop the boat, went back. I thought, I've got to cut this dive short. So I looked at my gun, I had about 80 bar left. So over half of my tank had already gone. And I just saw these, and I shouldn't have done it. I saw these 2 rays, I got a shot. I said, right, let's go back to the boat. I could just see the boat. I could just see the line. And Elizabeth, she sent up an SMB, so she sent it up on a reel. So you inflate it, it's like a big sausage, it goes up, hits the surface. But by this stage, we were behind the boat. Now the 2 guys in the boat, the 2 boat drivers, boatman and the driver and the guy that was helping, there was 2 seats, they were sitting there looking forward. And I had this in the back of my mind, I just hope they see that buoy, because we were drifting fast, and I was just shooting across the reef. And then we had to do the deco, popped up to the surface. We're about half a mile behind the back of the boat. I shouted, I knew they wouldn't hear me. And there was a big sea running. So first thing you do, and I had a big SMB, and I hadn't inflated it. So I just got all my weights, I just dropped them all. Just dropped all my weights. That's what I did first of all. Took my rig off, inflated it, got on top of it, so I just straddled it like a horse. I sat there, I'd handed the camera to the director, I inflated the SMB, it was on a CO2 cartridge, inflated that so it goes right up, took my EPIRB off, called the boat. They could hear me, but they couldn't see me. They could hear me, I couldn't hear them, because I was in the troughs of the waves. By this stage, and I was looking at the coastline, I thought, if I drop the camera and I get them to drop their rigs, they just have on your wetsuit, that's going to keep you afloat, you're not going to get cold or anything, but we can all swim, we're all fit, and we'll just, because I could see the current, and I thought we can just go at a diagonal, we could make it. But by the time that took place, the boat was doing a zigzag search and was coming back, and we're in the water for about 40 minutes. So you realise and I found out, that director I spoke to about a year later, Naomi, and she said, Michael, I went back and I was on a shoot with some South Africans, and they told me that there was a South African film crew out there that did exactly the same thing. They were swept out, they ended up in the Indian Ocean, never even found them. So that just shows you how critical it can be to be ready for those sorts of situations. And I always think, when you're offshore, a long way off, you have your SMB, you have to be prepared to these moments. They don't happen very often, thank God. Most of the time you're diving on a shallow reef or in a lake or something, and you just worry about when the next cup of tea is going to come. Anyway, I think we better stop there on the question front.
I think we had better stop on that dramatic note. So I'll apologise to anonymous attendee.
Oh, sorry about that.
Because the question on the best advice for young people wanting to get into the industry would probably merit a whole other talk, and maybe we'll get you back one day to give that talk.
We did talk about that, didn't we, Katie, this morning? So yeah, so that
Michael
was...
must be absolutely exhausted, having done a presentation and workshop with students before this particular talk. So please join me in thanking him. We'll be assembling outside for refreshments. You can ask Mike questions, but only after he's had a chance to have a drink. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.